Hello again, everybody. This is Jason Powers doing this video on. I look at it as three topics: economic, social, and psychology. Um, this is kind of a mixture of multiple ideas that have come from different sources on historical background, dating back to the before Christ, and then going forward to modern day. And a lot of it has to do with how we constantly fight the struggle between people and how they view or perceive the world and how they determine um, what is the best course of action in terms of their plights individually and the economic plights from the social good. So, I guess the quick rundown from an economic standpoint is if you think about if we go back to the Roman decline, which was in roughly 476, was the date that the empire fell apart through outside factors, war, famine, um, invasion, invasion that was subtly done through the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, who were pushed in by the Huns. And as they escaped into the Roman Empire, the empire had been weakened over, multiple generations, or I guess you could say multiple rulers and emperors ever since the mid fourth century, which was during the last bit of Christianity when Constantine made Christianity the official religion in I think around 330 AD, which is 300 years after Christ had died. Um, the empire itself had problems with their treasury. They stopped winning wars. There was a certain amount of social decadence that took place, and there was innumerable incompetence in leadership, which comes with every fall of any great civilization. In some ways, it would be I would almost liken it to Joseph Schumpeter's creative destruction, which is tied more to businesses. But businesses go through an arc of growth, the entrepreneurial beginnings and wild upswing, the hockey stick growth to achieve a pinnacle in a certain field. Same way with empires, they reach an apex or reach a top end, and then they decline back down the other side because um, usually what happens is people become complacent because without any pushback or efforts to rein in what is seen as decadence and immorality. And immorality in this case is sometimes just basic laziness, which ties into the psychology of this, which is that, when you look at people, everybody says we're either a follower or a leader, and the vast majority of us are not leadership material, whether we want to admit that to ourselves or not. We tend to like to follow. I mean, just that's just reality. Um, because if you look at any organizational hierarchy, there's only so many managers and there's only so many heads of departments and there's only one CEO or one chairman of the board. So there can only be so many leaders in a particular organization, especially the larger it gets, even though you can add more levels. That's where you get the levels of management, and each one defines a department. There has to be a pyramid structure, which has always existed in any situation. So you have people at the very top, and leadership doesn't can be. I'm talking about people who you define truly as leaders. Um, Leaders are usually seen as elitist. They're also seen as experts, and depending upon who's looking at them, they're seen as exploiters. There's the threes. That's an easy way to remember it. Reality is they generally work at life. There's always going to be those that are they're going to have negative traits that are going to achieve things through less than scrupulous manners, but that goes with any human being in this world. On the other side, on the flip side, when you look at followers, a lot of followers, you can have average, ordinary people who are actually followers, but then there's people that are truly just absolute followers on everything, and they only do things because other people do it. and they usually they have three characteristics that I think exist, and they may not want to hear it, but that's the truth. They're weak physically or weaker, uh, stupid, or they're IQ challenged. In other words, no matter how much you teach them or try to train them, there's only a certain amount of capacity that they have to understand that. And lastly, unmotivated. Now, the first two things can be helped by motivation. If you have a highly motivated individual, and there are people out there that can be highly motivated, they can um, they can undo the other two things. As a matter of fact, there's many stories of people who, based upon their IQ or based upon their physical challenges and disabilities, have achieved a lot of great things that many of us can't achieve. They've enhanced the talents and attributes that have been given to them outside of certain deficiencies and made those things work for them. But they did that because of their motivation. And so when you look at that, if you're an unmotivated person, it doesn't matter. If you're totally unmotivated, it doesn't even matter if you have a high IQ. It doesn't matter if you're physically stronger than anybody. If you're just sitting around doing nothing and you're just resting on your laurels, you'll get supplanted. You'll get passed up. It's just reality. There's no two ways around that because the longer you stay unmotivated, the more likely it is that someone's going to come along and take that from which you think you deserve and take that from you in one way, shape, or form. They'll take it either by your position, because if you're unmotivated, your boss isn't going to want to keep you. If you have a business and you're unmotivated, well, guess what? Your competition is going to come along and take that from you. And if you're unmotivated and you're sitting at home doing nothing, I have a feeling that you probably have a family member or mother, a father, a girlfriend, a wife, whatever. And if they see you sitting on your butt, and I'm not just talking about men, there's women, lots and lots of women that are exactly like this, that are very unmotivated, who also would fall into that category. Someone's going to say, why don't you get off your dead ass and do something? That's a very simple request. And if you don't do it, it's going to be pretty obvious that you fall into this follower category. You want things. That's what you do. You want things that you can't have. And so by keeping yourself unmotivated and in these other two situations, you can use that as an excuse not to do anything about your situation in life. So that's psychology. So when you look at this, what does that have to do with the social contract? Well, if you think of, two of the ideas that have come out of, um, communism and socialism, or communism and capitalism. I'm sorry. Um, Capitalism is always being seen nowadays as inherently evil, that it's exploitative, that people can't achieve anything because, only the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, if you look at the standard of living or the way people live today, um, you'd find that most of the things that they're having to deal with nowadays are a quite bit better off than what they were 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago. I mean, is there anybody in a Western civilization or a Western country like the United States or Europe or Australia or even Japan or even South Korea that has an inability to achieve, get a car, maintain a home, pay their rent, get their food? It's just a matter of whether they want to, and it's a matter, and they have, and there's most countries, even places like in Africa, you can pick up a cell phone and you can call someone if you want something. I mean, there's more cell phones probably now than there are people on this planet, for Christ's sakes, or at least certainly as close as one a cell phone per person. So there's very few people that aren't accessing something that 100 years ago would have been just an absolute luxury to have, to be able to pick up any kind of box to get information out of, or call anybody, or to make a plan or make a video. I mean, when the Arab Spring of 2011 took place, didn't we see many videos coming out of Iran and Iraq and other places in the Middle East? They were recording the violence and putting them up on the internet. You think you would have seen that 100 years ago? Absolutely not. The fact that we can do that kind of stuff shows that even in places that are at that point were under a dictatorial or chaotic situation, messages could get out. I mean, granted, it wasn't. I'm just using that as an example. The example I'm trying to say is that people have a much better existence nowadays than they ever had in the past. I mean, toilet paper was invented about 100 and 120 years ago. I think it was like 1890s or 1900 that toilet paper actually became a thing in this world that people would use to handle their business. And you think about that. So if you go back 200 years, what did they do? They had to do something different, and you know what that is. What I'm trying to say here is that if you think about economic achievement, and when you talk about capitalism in such a negative light, you're almost ignoring the fact that any day of the week that you have right now is better than any day of any king in the past had. And that's been stated many times over by other more profound thinkers than I am, who can walk through history in a much more cohesive manner than I will today. But what I'm trying to get to is that when you look at that, the reason why capitalism has worked as well as it has is because being giving people the options to make their own decisions is the best way they can do to go about achieving their goals in life. That goes to what I would call your central psyche, which is your locus of control. Do you believe in your own internal locus of control, that you have a handle on your own reality, or do you believe that everything is influenced by outside events and that you have no control at all over your own behaviors or what goes on around you? Sure, events happen around you, but how you respond to them, or has been said over and over again, has a lot to do with whether or not those events have any impact on you. And there's a lot of people who have been impacted by horrible tragedies that have taken those tragedies and turned it into a methodology to achieve more in life than they ever did before. In other words, and this is an Eastern philosophy, from crisis comes opportunity, that they've used the worst circumstance available to them to make an opportunity. And that opportunity isn't about uh, rebalancing the scales across the world, or saying that everybody should give up their private property and we should all just live, all even Steven. Because here's the thing, it still goes down to motivation, because amongst those people who eventually are more motivated, they're going to find ways to raise their standard of living, because the human will is stronger than any top down system that you can come up with. The reason why capitalism is so abhorred by so many people, at least in a certain ideological bent, is because it sorts people into winners and losers, and people who lose too much don't like the game. So they flip the board up and they say, "I want the rules to change," and they don't like the rules. And the rules of capitalism, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the rules of capitalism are always quote unquote fair. Life isn't fair, but the rules of making contracts and going about trying to secure capital and go about achieving a business idea, that's a very risky situation. It's a rare person who can run a business for over 5 years and keep it afloat. My mom did that, and my mom was no great shakes mentally, in terms of, she didn't go to some high fluting school. She didn't even she got out of high school with C's. She was a Marine Corps vet. She wound up being basically working in a fancy boot stitching factory, and then she worked in retail, and then she wound up running a consignment shop. Now you may say, well, that's no real business. No, it doesn't seem like a real business, except she had clients and she had customers and she had inventory and she had to take care of bookkeeping, and she had to make sure she paid the rent, and she had to make sure she paid herself, and she had to make sure she kept the lights on in the place. And she did that for 15 years. So despite what you might think, that is running a business. It may be a hobby or a jobby, or you may give it some other kind of mental name just because that's to dismiss or just besmirch somebody's efforts. But I think you're missing the forest for the trees there. Um, so when you look at Marx, on the other hand, and his idea that everything is about a social struggle, a constant struggle, and that everybody has to fight to to get us all down to the same level. It's utter nonsense, and that's my opinion. And there's other people that might say wrong. And Marx was not exactly a person you want to model as a person in life. He was highly indebted from an early age. He didn't love his father very much, or certainly didn't care too much for him because his father was uh, wanted him to become something accomplished, like a lawyer. And when his father passed away, he decided that he didn't want to go ahead and even attend his father's own funeral, the father who financed his ability to go to school, which is kind of reprehensible, in my opinion. But be that as it may, he may have had some untold resentment there. But overall, he was indebted in his entire life and he hated it. He never got a real job, which means he really didn't even understand what he was writing about because he never actually had to go out and get a job and do something with it. And instead, it was easier to complain about people who made money off of interest or the no good money grubbers. And he had the prejudices of his time, which I won't use that against him per se, because many other people held the same prejudice for even less intelligent reasons. But that's just the way things fell. But throughout his life, he wasn't exactly the most moral person. I mean, I think he slept with his own um, maid or housekeeper and impregnated her, while he talked about loving his wife. So that doesn't exactly make him somebody that you want to live up to as a moral high father or figure of import. So here's a guy who, at his death, he only had a handful of people show up at his death. I think it was like a dozen or so, and that didn't make him particularly a well-founded person who understood what it is that it took to make friends in this world. He left this world with a lot of papers and a lot of I would call excited writings that made him seem like the only thing he was interested in was developing this system he thought that would work in this way, that he thought that he just ignored human behavior, or at least if he thought he understood human behavior, he only understood it from his viewpoint, which was generally a very, I would say, narcissistic and almost psychopathic behavior mentality, which he was very exploitative. He seemed to be only concentrating on himself, and he didn't really care too much about the other people around him. And he certainly didn't even care about the very workers that he was talking about, because for the most part, he couldn't even get down uh, low enough to actually become one of them, so to speak. He thought he was better than they were anyway. So I don't really see how he had any connection whatsoever to this workers union. And what's worse is everything he came up with was ideas that he got even more contorted when you go into the 20th century, between Lenin and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot and any ten-bot dictator in Central America and South America. You could take that whole concept right there and say that um, most of the people who employed his ideas were highly authoritarian, and all they wanted to do was use the sell of oh, we're going to even out the playing field for the rest of you. But meanwhile, all they were doing was just sucking the wealth out of the very people they set up as the despised, the people who had made successes, the people who were running farms, who were individually motivated to try to make it ahead. And I'm not saying that they were all perfect little angels and never did anything wrong. That's not the point. The point is that when you deploy tactics of manipulation to say, yeah, look at them, they're the bad people, you're just sicking people on other people, because you're just playing to their weaknesses, and they're playing to their follower mentality, which says that they want something from other people who have it. So it's the haves and the have-nots, and that's just, to me, a destructive behavior pattern that unfortunately results in a lot of problems here with the narcissism and the psychopathy. Um, so and then so if you look at today, or the modern day, I guess I'm going to try to shorten this up a little bit, but if you look at the modern day, You have 97.8% of the taxpayers in the United States of America are in the top 50% of income earners. So you have half the population who receive all the income transfers. They pay 2.3% of the taxes that are paid into America. So this imbalance where you have, this anybody above a certain income level are paying most of the taxes, and then you're asking them to pay more because the people at the bottom don't want to do any more than they have to. They see it as their right to have that money. They see it as, oh, I need a social safety net. Well, this is unsustainable. Eventually, either taxes are going to run out, or this is going to grow so big that it isn't really going to matter what you do. You have debt that gets piled up on this because, like anything else, we borrow against our assets in this country. Our borrowing is obviously we owe it to ourselves, but that money has to come from somewhere, and we print it, and that devalues every dollar that's already out in the system. So that's where you get your inflationary moves, which is why it's kind of interesting. The Fed is now gradually moving up interest rates in our country, and they held them at near zero for almost a decade under the last president. And then now, because of a new president, they seem very interested in moving it because they say the economy is growing and can handle it. So, what does that say about the economic stability that was going on under the Obama administration and prior to that? What is the problematic here is these transfer payments are not going to be sustainable. Why? Because family sizes are getting smaller. Less men are getting married, and less men want to be They don't want a bachelor tax. They don't want to be penalized for the fact that they don't want to get married to women who no longer care about them in any way, shape, or form because they don't meet up to their standards or expectations or whatever dogma they bought into. Which we can go down that road too and talk about feminism and the intersection with Marxism and postmodernism and all that kind of stuff. That isn't going to, that's a whole other presentation. I have to do a lot of research to even get into that. But what I'm trying to get to is you have this whole setup of people who have impacted us in today's scenario. You have the idea that the free market should work if we allow it to work, because if we eliminate or at least keep regulations down to a minimum, so less laws, and we only have contracts, and we only try to set up minimal ways to keep people in check or in fairness when they develop systems together or develop mutually beneficial contracts with each other. That's a good idea. But instead, we also have this semi-socialist mentality that comes from transfer payments, where we want to have heavy regulations, which makes it hard to get into a business. As a matter of fact, if you're in certain businesses, there's people that lobby to have heavy regulations so that nobody else can break into that business. It's a form of barriers and protectionism, and they want to level people up by increasing taxes on the highest earners. So in America, for example, 3.3 million are the top 1%. They on average make $421,000 a year. So if you think of 421,000 times 3.3 million, that's like $1.2 trillion. So I think the size of our economy is like 18 to 20 trillion dollars or something like that. So talk about 5 or 7% of the top 1%. That's how much they owe. That's how much they earn against the economy. So there's a lot of other factors involved in here, but the fact is you can only pump so much money, or that's the lowest level of what they make. You can only pump so much money out of these people and expect them to want to continue to make that kind of money or try to earn it, because if every dollar you earn above that is 100% taxed, why would you even bother to earn it? You're going to just say, why waste my time? Why should I work extra hours? Why should I earn all this extra money just so I can hand it over to somebody else? I mean, those people don't want to do it. That's where the psychology comes from. You know, some people will earn as much as you can allow them to earn. If you allow them to earn it, they'll earn it. And I know a lot of them will say, well, they earn it through investment. They earn it through, you know, taking advantage of the legal system. Well, you know what? There's other people that have taken advantage of the legal system too, and those people happen to be here. They know how to pull the levers of the government in order to get free stuff. They know how to claim on their taxes certain benefits, and they know how to go to the right offices, and they know who to talk to in order to get their benefits taken care of without having to do anything but just sign up for them. So who's more working the system? The people up here because they happen to know how to invest, or they know how to get the right information in order to make money, uh, or these people that are learning how to use the information to get the free money that they think they deserve. I mean, they're sitting at home doing nothing. This person's out here trying to make money, or maybe they are sitting on their rear end all day long and just cashing in the checks. I mean, it's a nice thing to say that, but they didn't get there on accident. They had to do something prior to that. So you may not agree with how they got there, but most likely it wasn't just solely by happenstance. They weren't all born on third base. A lot of them had to work to get to third base before they hit the home run. So, and that analogy does hold true. So, I'm going to cut this off because I'm already pretty long on this, but that's my 2 cents on this.